I took a break to take care of my children. I'm ready to come back and do this work for you.
Today on the show, we sit down with Nancy McSharry Jensen. Nancy is the program director of Reboot in Seattle, Washington. Reboot is a career accelerator program designed for women looking to accelerate their transition back into the industry through technology training, personal branding tools, and networking. This is The Career Queue, the podcast focused on helping you navigate the signals in your career to keep you growing and moving forward in business and in life. Here's today's host, Stacey Harris.
So welcome to the podcast, Nancy. It's so great to have you here. Thank you so much.
Oh, I'm delighted to be here.
You know, we got introduced as a part of Seattle Startup Week.
That's right.
A few months ago. And I knew the moment that I spoke with you, I was like, we have to get Nancy on the show. Loved your energy, loved the work that you guys are doing. And the core of our conversation will be about Reboot.
Right.
Reboot Seattle, specifically, the overall Reboot program. But I actually want to kick things off with your professional story because we actually did touch on that when we met through Seattle Startup Week. So do you mind sharing a little bit about how you got to where you are today?
Oh, sure. Well, I started my career, I started as a reporter at a trade magazine. Very quickly realized that I didn't like being in a room by myself writing all the time. And the people I wrote with were amazing. And I, really just wanted to go out and go running. I got a job, an opportunity to work at International Data Corporation, and this is in the late 80s. And my boss is a guy named Aaron Goldberg said, hey, we think there's an opportunity in this PC software marketplace. And keep in mind, this is when Lotus 1-2-3 was big. And I think he saw me as an unguided missile of energy. And he just said, here, I'm going to focus you over here. And he really gave me my first big break professionally. And so I went from saying, hey, there's a couple of these software products to building that into a $1 million consulting business for IDC. And after a couple of years, I, badgered and begged him and said, please let me go to the West Coast because that's where all the software companies are. And so then I opened their West Coast research office. So, within 5 years, I had started up 2 or 3 businesses for IDC, grew them, got the West Coast office to about 25 people. And I knew a fella at Microsoft named Brad Silverberg, and he said, hey, have you ever thought about being a product manager? And I said, sure, what's a product manager?
Sounds great. I'd love to do that.
I knew I had talked with a lot of them in my work as an analyst. I was looking for kind of my next thing. I was young, I was unmarried, I still owed money for my education. And I thought, why not?
Yep.
I'll try it. I'll learn how to be a product manager. It'll be cheaper than business school. And so I came up and I was product manager for 12 years at Microsoft. Yeah. And so I worked on a lot of really interesting products. The biggest one probably was SharePoint. And so I had the opportunity to work on that product from its original design through a couple of changes in that design to its initial market entry, and then worked with the team to grow it to about $360 million, which is when I stepped off, and now it's a $1 billion business. So I was very fortunate when I was there. And it's a funny jumping off point because I was there. My daughter, my eldest, was on her way, and I realized that I can't do this all engrossing job and have a family without jobbing it out, right? And I'm an older mom. I really felt like I waited a while to do this, so I was going to step back. So, my daughter showed up. I stepped back from Microsoft. I still worked. I, did some teaching over at the Professional and Continuing Ed program at UW in software product management. And that was good. And I did some consulting. And then my second showed up, and I was a train wreck. Joe, he turned 6 today. Happy birthday, Joe. But he didn't sleep for 2.5 years, and that meant I didn't sleep for 2.5 years. And so I really had to take a step back. And that was very humbling because you think, you've been trained to think, yes, you can do it all. You can work. You can step back and work part-time. But there's a ton of research on this, actually, that shows it's when the second child shows up, a lot of professional women really take a step back because you are human and you have frailties, and, mine, sadly, is sleep. But then, so I ended up taking what I wanted to take was a 1-year break, and it ended up being 4 years. And about a year ago, I was signing Joe up for kindergarten, and I thought, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? I can't look at the 4 walls of my home. I need to go back to work. I started going on job interviews, and it got down to a couple of times where it became apparent that I was going to get the job, and I started to cry. And I thought, I don't really want to go back full-time, but I want to go back. It also became apparent when I went on these interviews that I was not up to speed on some of the technology and tools. And that was, again, that was really a hard stop for me because in tech, everybody prides themselves on being up to speed on things. And I was on one interview, they were talking about a bunch of tools and technologies, and I was nodding and saying, oh, yes. And then I'm in the ladies' room, like Googling what they were talking about. And at that point, a friend of mine said, hey, there's this Reboot program in Silicon Valley. Because, I was talking about it. I went on this interview loop, and I really didn't know what they were talking about, and that kind of stopped me. And she said, go take this program. I have 2 of my colleagues have taken it, and they said, it's great. So I did. It was kind of it sounds like a big leap. It was a little leap. It was just a little bet where I thought, okay, my mother-in-law came to help with the kids. I went down and stayed with my best friend for 5 days. Nice. My other friends lent me their car. So it cost me the cost of the program and airfare. I took the program, and after one day, I went to the founders and I said, this is amazing. There's a huge opportunity for this in the Puget Sound. Please let me work with you. And long story short, we ran our pilot program here in the fall of 2016, and we had a cohort of 31 women. They were fantastic. So that's how we got here.
I love that. And is that you had a need, right? As you said, it was kind of a small leap, but it was an investment in yourself.
Absolutely.
Right? Like no one else was telling you, like, you have to do this in order to get a job.
Right.
You said earlier, going to Microsoft was cheaper than business school.
Yeah.
Right. And, the cost of the program plus the airfare, hanging out with your girlfriend, for dinner.
Oh, yeah.
That sounds fantastic. But that so quickly you understood the value. Like within 24 hours, you understood the value.
And to be fair, I had been asking a lot of people up here as I was thinking about how to go back, right? As we found with Reboot, there's several ways. You can go back to what you did before. Right. And that was my initial foray. I thought, I'll just go back and I'll be a product manager or a product marketer.
Doing what you know.
Doing what I know.
And that you're really good at.
And that I'm good at, yeah. The thing is, details in my life have changed. I have a spouse. I have kids. I have older parents that I have to deal with, right? And so I can't be 24/7 on the job the way I was in my 20s and 30s, right? So that was one part of it. And I think another part was I learned a lot on that career break. I did. Many women are like this. I did a lot of community work. I ran an academic-based nonprofit and made sure that the budget was right-sized and that the programming for the organization was correct. I did some volunteer work with Girls on the Run of Puget Sound. I learned a lot of things about working with volunteers, working with the community, and working with women, frankly. And I wanted to make sure that whatever it was I did next had an element of that. So, and the other part was I really wanted to still see my husband and my kids and my
concept,
friends.
Right?
Yeah. And so I thought I'm going to have to make my own job.
Yeah.
I think you and I talked about this. I always look at Mindy Kaling as a model for this, right? She has an interesting story where she says, look, nobody is going to hire me for the leading lady role, right? I'm going to have to make those roles myself. And I always think about that as I think about building Reboot up in Seattle because I think, oh, yeah, nobody's going to say, oh, yes, Nancy, we know you have these rich skills, but we're not going to let you work 20 hours a week and do it from home. And by the way, go at 2 o'clock to pick up the kids, right? I knew I was going to have to do it myself.
Yep. Well, so that actually leads us to you're the program director for Reboot Seattle. So let's actually slide right into Reboot.
Sure.
What is Reboot?
So what Reboot is, it's a program designed for women who have taken a career break, like me, right? You've stepped back to take care of your family, whether your kids or your elderly parents, maybe both. And the challenge is when you go back to work, things have changed, right? Technology moves in a very, very quick manner, right? If you look at Moore's Law, every 2 years, things miniaturize, and boy, that extends out to the rest of technology. And so Reboot is designed to get you current with, the most up-to-date tools and technologies and trends in the marketplace, right? To get you connected with people who are in the same position as you, and also that can help you go to whatever it is you're going to do next. And that gives you the confidence to get back out there, right? For many women, and we find this with Reboot, many women, when they take a break, if you have 1 or 2 kids, you might be out for 10 years, right? And when it's time to go back, your connections are kind of dusty, right? Because everybody's had this. You work with someone and you love working with them, and then one of you leaves and you meet for a cocktail or a coffee and you think, oh, all we really have in common is work, right? And so you kind of let those connections go, but when it's time to go back to work, you need them. So how do you re-engage? I think the other thing is that many women find that their confidence dwindles, right? And this is a much bigger issue, right, about the value of what you do when you're working in the home or you're working in the community, right? And so we work really hard at Reboot to make sure that the women in our cohorts, and all women, frankly, who want to go back into the workforce, understand the value that they bring as they go to their next step.
And especially, like you had said earlier about your the academic nonprofit.
Yeah.
You were managing budgets. You were developing programs and managing a volunteer program. I mean, those are all incredibly valuable skills in a traditional workplace.
Absolutely.
You just didn't have it in that traditional realm of what a career,
right?
A job description on Indeed.com.
That's right.
I mean, that wasn't a job description that was
correct.
posted.
Correct. But that's all extremely valuable. And so then, what Reboot does is we have an 8-week program. It's an accelerator, and an accelerator is just what it says. It speeds up your transition back to work. And there's some career discernment and, planning. And really it's thinking with a growth mindset. A ton of technical tools and training. So we really focus on personal branding, social media. And, most of our cohort, they know about Facebook, but they really don't know how this is used in the bigger marketplace. LinkedIn is huge. And whether you're working for a corporate job, whether you're promoting your own thing, it is a really potent tool. We also do a lot of cloud computing training up here because, of course, in the Seattle area, you've got Amazon Web Services, there's OneDrive, of course, there's, Google Drive. There's a lot of cloud services that you really need to know when you go into a business, and then some productivity tools. I think the biggest change for a lot of our cohort has been the advent of social media and video, right? I don't know how many times I've had a Google Hangout or a Skype call where I'm putting it up on a pile of books, right, and going and checking my face before I got on the phone call. Because the first time I did one, I was like, oh, my God, why am I having a video chat with my grandma? And I mean, these are things that you don't think about, when you're ferrying the kids to and from. So what we do is we get our cohorts back. And then what we do is we introduce them to friendly recruiters and friendly employers who are open to bringing these returnees back. Right?
I love that.
And it's really, I would say that from an employer's perspective, I mean, there's this escalating battle for talent right now. Yeah.
That's great.
It's a great opportunity.
I'm trying to figure out whether as a candidate you would be considered a buyer or a seller. But I think it's a buyer's market, right? You as the candidate,
yes.
they're recruiting heavily for top talent. And in this instance, you're talking about people that have already been in the workforce.
Absolutely.
Right? And that is key.
Our cohorts, on average, have 10 years of work experience, right? They all have BAs. 2/3 of them have an advanced degree. These are people who have been successful professionally, right? There isn't any reason to think that they won't be successful again. But there's a couple of bumps they got to go over in order to get there, right? I mean, the logical question that an employer is going to ask is, well, what happened in this 2, 5, 10-year time period? And they need, if you want to think of it in a sales perspective, they need a couple of good objection handlers, and we give it to them.
Yep. The succinct response to...
I took a break to take care of my children. During that time, I ran an academic-based nonprofit. I managed a budget of $800,000. I'm ready to come back and do this work for you. Pivot.
Boom. Mic drop. Okay.
Right?
So let's talk about how long does a Reboot program last?
So there's a couple of options, right? Right now we have 2 accelerators. There's a 1-week immersion, right? And it's 32 hours of training and networking and discernment. And it is intense. So we bring you in Monday morning, and we send you home Friday night. And in between there, we talk about your growth mindset, as I said before, branding, social media, Google Docs, the Microsoft suite, how to use video tools, how to position yourself in the marketplace. And it's like going to summer camp. I did an immersion myself. These are my camp friends. I mean, it gets you up to speed really, really fast. We also have an 8-week version, and that's what we started with here in Seattle. So our cohort would come in once a week for 3 hours. for 8 weeks. And each week we were focused on a particular topic.
Okay. So, and then you spend that week
working on that. They had homework. This year we're actually expanding that to add networking opportunities. So, for example, personal branding is really hot right now. So we'll have a section on personal branding in the spring cohort. And so we're going to be holding that over at CoMotion Labs at UW. Then we'll have a follow-up session down at Impact Hub in Pioneer Square. So we just agreed to do a Lunch and Learn series with them. So each week, as we do a personal branding session with the cohort, we'll then say, let's do a follow-on section. If you want to learn more about this or meet other people who are interested in this, we'll see you Friday down at Impact Hub. And then we'll repeat it there. And the Impact Hub members can come.
That's great.
Yeah.
And so you're extending it out into the community.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, and that's really important, right? These women, it's important for them to be connected with each other. They have to get connections out into the local community. And so what our fall cohort told us was we want more networking opportunities with each other and with the outside world. And we also want the opportunity to maybe get a little bit more. So in this case, we did this in the fall, and they said, well, it's great that there's all this personal branding, but tactically, how do I do it? So in this, we would go and what we'll do is we'll say, okay, here's what an email auto-signature looks like. Here is an avatar, and this is why you would or wouldn't use it. Here are some design tools that you might want to consider, because not all of us are designers. Do you need a business card? Answer, yes.
Short answer, only answer, yes.
So like that.
That's great. That leads into my next question, Nancy. You've obviously just talked about a number of the benefits, and that extension in the partnership with Impact Hub is one of those. But what are some of the other benefits of participating in the Reboot Career Accelerator program?
There are several benefits. I think the biggest one, and we promote this as part of our tagline, right? We get you current with the current technologies. And it's one thing when you hear your friends or your partners talking about the tools that they use. It's another thing altogether when you use it yourself and you have firsthand knowledge of that tool. That gives you confidence so that when you're going into an employer, whoever it is, and they say, oh, do you know how to Skype? You don't have to go, oh, yeah, well, I FaceTime. Sure. No, you've used it because we had you use it.
Yeah.
You have your little set of branding materials so that you are presenting yourself in the most up-to-date manner, right? That you have your talking points. I think another benefit is we actually have a follow-on program called Club Reboot, and it's a continuing ed and networking program. And so we just kicked it off this month, and we did it in partnership with the Women in Bio group here in Seattle.
Yeah.
It was great. We had about 50 women in the room. We filled the room. We happened to do this one on elevator pitches. And so what we talked about was, well, when you do an elevator pitch, you actually have to have a positioning framework behind it, right? Because otherwise you'll just talk and talk and talk and talk. And so we used Moore's, the Crossing the Chasm 6-point positioning. So we had everybody in the room do a 6-point positioning, and then they did elevator pitches. And every woman in the room had an elevator pitch, and they weren't completely done.
Right.
And we do some of that in the cohort, but it was a way to go on and really refine that. We had women from our Reboot cohort there. We had a bunch of women from the Women in Bio cohort. It was really a great night. And we've got one coming up with the Puget Sound Career Development Association. That's coming up in March. And like I said, with Impact Hub, we're doing a lot of work with local women in tech and women employers groups, because that's where our cohort wants to go, right? We need to help introduce them, and we also need to introduce topics that are important to them. Negotiation strategies, huge.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. As you were talking, I was starting to think this, especially the immersion program, from a time perspective, do you have any cohorts for that 1-week immersion that have actually taken a week's vacation because they're still currently in their career and actually want that?
There have been a couple of women who have done that. Yeah, for the most part, women who are taking the 1-week cohort, they have a need to get back into the workplace in a very rapid manner. And some of it are circumstances. I would say about a quarter of the women who are in the Reboot program are going through a midlife transition. And that's a polite way of saying maybe they're separated, maybe they're divorced, maybe the kids are out of the house, and they are saying, well, gosh, what am I going to do with myself? Maybe they've relocated. We certainly had a couple of people in our cohort here who faced that. But in each case, they have an immediate need to get themselves back out into the workforce. And again, we're an accelerator. You can do this on your own.
You're right.
It takes time, and it takes energy, and it takes money, right? We compress that time frame for you. We do it in this super cost-effective manner, and we're a one-stop shop. Right? There's lots of other things out there. We just put it all together for you in a nice package and say, okay, we'll get you ready. There you go. And then with the Club Reboot, we don't want to leave anybody hanging. Right. So we have these add-on opportunities for, making sure you stay connected with your community, that you meet other people in the community, and that you go out and get whatever your next job is. That means different things to different people.
Sure. You just said you can do it on your own. It is possible, DIY.
Yeah.
Right? But one of the differentiators is that you're building community at the same time.
Right.
So,
I would say we have three key differentiators.
Yeah.
One is the technical tools and training. You can't underestimate that. Those change
rapidly.
So fast. And trying to figure out, what's hot and what's current. What's current now in the business marketplace is totally different than what was hot a year ago. Right?
Oh,
like
absolutely.
when I was in the Valley, I went and took this in the Valley. Everybody was all hot and bothered about Periscope. Where is it today? I don't, there's Facebook Live.
Right.
Right, which I would say superseded that. And, great early view into that. The other thing are things, news aggregators like Pocket and Flipbook and Declara. And there's a cajillion of those. And I would say that hasn't shaken out yet. But the fact that you're exposed to them and know that they're out there, super important.
Oh, yeah. Well, in the landscape, getting reintroduced back into that landscape will allow you to stay up to date, because a year from now it will look so incredibly different.
Yeah, but
right?
it's funny. It's like going on a trip. Right? You can plan it and think about it, but you got to get on the road.
Exactly.
But I would say the other differentiator is that we have a wonderful steering committee member named Jen Youngblood, and she works for Right Life Design, and she's all about career transition and helping you figure out, what is the next chapter in your life. She actually has a program called Write Your Next Chapter that you can take in addition to Reboot, that says, what is my next step going to be? Because for some of our cohort, they know, right? But some don't. We'll give you a little bit of that, but we're really about, okay, here's what's hot in business, and we'll get you up to speed. And then, as you said, yes, there is the community aspect. You cannot underestimate that. And then I would say the community extends out also to employers and recruiters. I would say our best rated overall event from the fall, we had a recruiter and returnee panel. And so we had 8 people up there, and it was a combination of industry and corporate and people who said, yeah, I was out for 2, 4, 8 years, and I went back, and here's what happened. For our cohort, it's very compelling to see these mostly women in these positions to say, if you can do it, I can do it.
You look like me. Your life is similar to mine.
Yes.
If you can do it, I can do it.
Yep.
I love that. We're actually going to take a quick break. And I actually want to talk a little bit more about some of the success stories and partnerships that Reboot is working with.
Oh, sounds great.
Awesome.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to check out the show notes at thecareerq.com, where you can also subscribe to the podcast and sign up for our newsletter.
So welcome back to the Career Q. Today we're speaking with Nancy McSharry Jensen from Reboot Seattle. And before the break, we were actually just talking about what is Reboot, what does it mean to be a part of the accelerator program, and the benefits that come along with participating in a program like Reboot Seattle. What I actually want to talk about now, Nancy, is you had briefly mentioned before the panel of folks that you had come in for your fall cohort. Let's talk about some of the successes that you guys have seen come out of your program.
I love talking about this. Some data that we just turned up working with our Silicon Valley partner, 80% of the Seattle and the Silicon Valley cohort report finding meaningful work as a result of taking the Reboot Accelerator program. And let me talk a little bit about what forms that can take. Some of it is like we talked about earlier, people saying, you know what, just need to go back to work. So down in the Valley, there's a gal named Dana Posey, and she had been out of the workforce for quite a while, took the Reboot program. I think she did an internship there. She now works for JetBlue Technology Ventures, and I think she's their office manager. She has a really interesting and focused job. Go back to a traditional 40-hour-a-week job, right? Some people want to do a part-time but very compelling job. So I think about somebody like Erica Parker Price, who has a traditional product management, product marketing background. She is doing writing now, and she does some work for WeFunder, which is a Kickstarter competitor. And she's super, I mean, I think they're all really interesting,
Right.
but she's a very interesting person. Then we have somebody like Jen Alviar. She has a background as a minister, and she just took a job for an organization called Doing Good Together. And there's more. Erin Campbell, who worked for, she came through our Reboot cohort. She's got a background as a physical therapist. She just took a job with a healthcare startup. And they're based here. She's going to be based up north. And she said, they're happy with letting me work at home. This is a range. So, in one case, you've got somebody who's working in a nonprofit. In another case, it's a work from home. In a third case, it's a part-time. In another case, it's a full-time. That really runs the gamut of what meaningful work looks like.
Right. And so to that, it's not exclusive to the technology industry.
Correct.
Yeah.
Well, in Seattle, let's face it, technology employers are pretty big. We absolutely have a range of background. In our last cohort, about half of the women had worked for local technology companies and in a variety of roles. We had engineers, product managers, program managers, business development people. We also had a lot of people who worked in retail, in the customer service area. We had a couple of people from the medical background. We had architects. We had interior designers. So there's a whole range of experience. I think one thing to consider when you think about technology really pervades every business now, and that's changed. You and I were talking about this earlier. 20 years ago, when you thought about software, it was, something that you had on a disk and you installed it on your PC or your desktop. Now, technology is in every business. Almost every business uses it, whether it's an online store or a way to connect with their customers or even just having a social media presence. It is a critical component of every business. So it's super important to have these skills.
Yep. Especially if it's been a while since you've been in industry, whatever industry you left, right, to get that refresher is going to give you that advantage.
Absolutely. Yeah. And each segment is different. And it's funny, like we just had this event with women in bio. One thing we found, and this probably wasn't a surprise to anybody but me, there's a lot of commonalities with the women in the biosciences as women in technology. They said, there aren't very many of us. We winnow down as we move up the ladder. And we talked about some of the vagaries of working in a very male-dominated business. Now, it's really different when you're talking with someone who's an EVP in the retail sector. Now, that's very female-focused. HR is female-focused, PR, very female-focused. They have very different challenges where they're saying, we're trying to figure out how to retain and then re-recruit women when they go to have their families, right? So super interesting elements. And then how the technology is manifested differs in each of those.
And ultimately, I think it comes down to just women wanting to champion other women.
Absolutely.
Right. You can't put a price on that.
No, you can't. And I have to say, this. I'm going to get on my soapbox. It makes me crazy that when women step out of the workforce and they go back and someone says, and I encountered this myself, oh, well, you haven't worked in 4 years. Well, it doesn't mean my mind stopped. Right. And it doesn't, I'm not dead. My skills are still there.
Still there, yeah.
I still have my track record of success and I still know how to do things. Right. And whatever I don't know, I'm sure I can learn very quickly. Right. And I think that makes me cuckoo. And so one thing that I am very focused on as these women come back online, if you will, is to make sure that they know how to really pivot to that question super fast.
Yeah.
Right? And let's face it, not everybody is going to be open to it, right? Someone is going to say, well, no, I just need the 28 to 32-year-old MBA fresh out of school that can go heads down and not do anything else. Okay, fair enough. You're not going to be a good match for a returnee. But there is this huge drive for diversity in organizations. And there's a boatload of research that shows that when you have someone who has that 10 years of work experience and 5 to 10 years of personal experience, they are more effective, as well as the diversity research that shows that diverse organizations are more productive and more profitable.
That has got to be a resounding yes for companies that are willing to partner with the likes of
Companies,
Reboot, right?
Companies that are smart are getting on this. I would say Expedia, which is a local sponsor, they are all over this. They're super, super focused on it. They're a wonderful partner, and we're looking for more partners like Expedia.
Yes.
They are so deliberate and thoughtful about how they are working with women in their organization. And, they know they haven't solved it, but they are really, really, I admire what they are doing.
Well, and it's a alternative or creative solution outside of the traditional pipeline of candidates, right? Recruiters will always come in and talk to us about, well, I can tell you the top 3 tools that I use on a daily basis. But if you have a highly talented, ready-to-go pool of candidates that come through Reboot,
That's right.
Why on earth, as an employer, would you say, man, they've been out of the workforce for 4 years, I'm not quite sure?
Well, we're working to change that.
Yeah. Education.
Right.
Yeah.
It's an education issue as much as anything.
Well, kudos to Expedia.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. And perhaps they're the ones that are going to be breaking that mold.
Yeah.
And like you said, if they're smart, those companies out there are smart enough to realize that this is a golden opportunity.
It's a gold mine. It really is. I mean, because in King County alone, 47% of the workforce is female, and over 40% of those take a break and want to go back into the workforce. And I haven't seen the latest numbers on this, but there was an article about a year ago in the Puget Sound Business Journal that said that there were 25,000 open jobs. If I were a recruiter, I would be all over this like white on rice. These are fabulous candidates. And you get your HR check. Oh, hey, I have a female candidate. Oh, hey, they might be over 40, which many of our candidates are, right? Do the math. And I would say that they're ready to go to work. They will work super hard. Why would you not do this?
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. So let's actually talk, where is Reboot available?
Right now, there are 4 Reboot Accelerator programs running in Silicon Valley, down in Redwood City, in Chicago, in New York, and here in Seattle. And there are expansion programs going on in Los Angeles, D.C., Atlanta, Connecticut, and Boston.
That's great. And obviously, for the folks that are outside of those areas, I still think there's an opportunity for you to be able to take the philosophy of Reboot, right?
Absolutely.
But if you do get an opportunity, whether you take a week to do an immersion program like you did in the Valley, or have it on your goals of 2017 or possibly even 2018, right?
That's right.
As you're like, I might need to return back to work once my youngest is in kindergarten.
That's right.
That's going to be in 2 years. I am going to have Reboot on my list of things to do.
And there are it's funny, there's a lot of opportunities. In the Silicon Valley headquarters, they've got a lot of programs in the pipeline. One is a digital option. So if you are living in a smaller community, perhaps in the Midwest or the South, and your area might not command enough of a market to say have a big formal program, we may have, we're going to have a digital version for you to take.
That's great.
Right? So using our dog food, as they say, we're using the technology to let people should know that if you're not in one of these areas, Reboot will be making these things available
Keep an eye
to
out.
you. Yep.
Yeah, that's great. Well, so let's actually talk about what are the plans for Reboot in 2017 and beyond?
Well, so I'll talk about here in Seattle, and then I can talk about Reboot in the Valley and in the U.S. So here in Seattle, we are expanding. We had a pilot program in 2016. It was an 8-week accelerator. In the spring, we are having a 1-week immersion over in Bellevue. So it's at Expedia headquarters. And then we're going to run our 8-week accelerator again here in the spring over at UW. We're going to take the summer off, as people do in Seattle.
Yes. Enjoy the weather.
Although we may have a couple of workshops. And then in the fall, we plan to run an 8-week and an accelerator again. And we will run the 8-week here in Seattle, and we'll run the 1-week on the east side. Again.
Okay.
So, 2 programs, the 1 week in the fall, 1 week in the spring, 8-week in the fall, 8-week in the spring.
Okay.
And then we also have Club Reboot, where we're partnering with a lot of organizations. And over time, as we get more cohorts coming through the Reboot program, Club Reboot will become more of a standalone networking event. For right now, we really want to expose people to what else is out there.
Right.
And then, as I said, at the headquarters level, there's huge geographic expansion going on right now. And so I would say go to rebootexcel.com. That's where all of the details for these programs are.
And we'll actually have a direct link to that website in our show notes.
Excellent.
At thecareerq.com. This has been fantastic, Nancy. I know that you and I could talk for hours.
Yeah.
Right?
We're heading out for a cocktail and it's not even noon.
It's 5 o'clock somewhere, right? So let's actually wrap things up a little bit more lighthearted. But,
Sure.
just I love your energy. I love your passion. But I'd love to peel a little bit more of the curtain back on Nancy. So we have some questions that we ask each of our guests. And, I love the conversations and I love this part because it really kind of gives us kind of that snowflake, experience because no one answer is the same. But so what was your first job and what were some of the fundamentals that you learned then that you still use today?
Oh, gosh. My very first job was a paper route. Oh. I was 9 years old and I delivered the Boston Globe. And I grew up in New England, as you probably can tell. And I learned the value of good accounting. I was just talking to my kids about this. You had to make sure that you knew who paid and who didn't. Customer service, really important, right? People, they were very specific about where they wanted their paper. And so I was very conscientious about this. I was also a paper girl when paper girls were not common. And so I have to say I worked that and put my hair in braids when I went collecting on Sundays with my little book. And I would say I use all of those. I use all of those skills today. And I think that if I were to put it in business terms, I understood the value of differentiation. I also understood that operationally, I needed to be very buttoned up.
Process.
Yeah.
Process is key.
Right. And, that paper route paid for my freshman year at college.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the first time I got, my first bucket of money, I think it was $20.
Right.
And I was going to go, I forget what I was going to buy. I think I was going to buy Polly Pockets or something. And my mother said, oh no, we're going down to the Rockland Trust to open up a bank account because you have to put that money in the bank. You're saving that for college. And I kind of went, aw, Mom. But over the years, I saved that money, and it paid for my freshman year tuition.
And 10 years later, you're in college, and it's paid for.
Yep. Well, at least the first year.
Right. Yeah, first year down.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So what have you read, listened to, or watched recently that you'd recommend to others?
Oh, I have a great book. I just read A History of the Daily Show.
Oh.
And it's, I want to say, a living history. It's an anecdotal overview from the producers and the reporters and the talent that were on the Daily Show when Jon Stewart was on there. And it is, particularly in the current economic and political climate, very prescient about what is happening today. And it's also, and it's a good celebrity gossip read as well.
Entertaining.
It's very entertaining, but it's also very educational about how to work politics in the media. So hands down, it kept me up till 2 a.m. a couple of nights, which is tough when your kids get up at 6. So I hands down would recommend that.
Okay, well we'll have a link to that on the book club. That's awesome. Okay, Nancy, you're sitting across from your 90-year-old self today. What do you think she'd say to you?
I don't know if she would tell me to get busy or to just sit down. I think it just depends on the day.
A little bit of both.
A little bit of both. I have one of my cousins said, I'm itchy. I just can't sit down. And I'm like, me either. I'm not good at just sitting and watching what's going on. I got to have stuff to do.
I love that.
So, I think it would depend on the day and how grouchy I was that day.
Okay, Nancy, this was a fantastic conversation. If someone is wanting to look into Reboot, you had mentioned earlier, go to the website. We have that link in the show notes. Is there any other way that listeners would be able to contact you guys?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. My business partner, Sarah Denwald, and I are online, and it's Nancy at RebootSeattle.com and Sarah at RebootSeattle.com. Email us and let us know if you're interested or if you have comments or ideas about what we're doing.
Or if you're an employer out there looking to potentially partner with Reboot.
Yes, or sponsor. We would love to talk to you.
I like that. Okay. And we'll have links to your email addresses in the show notes. So Thanks again, Nancy.
Oh, thank you, Stacey.
It's such a pleasure to be able to sit down and talk to you, and I want to be able to continue this conversation, and I'd love to be able to follow up with you guys.
Oh, absolutely. We'd love to talk
as
more.
the business grows.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Well, we're big. I listen to Career Q when I run.
You do?
I do.
Yay!
So I'm a fan as well as
we
somebody
have
on the
the
program.
Career Q. All right. Well, check us out at thecareerq.com, and we will talk to you next time.
Great. Thanks.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. Be sure to head on over to thecareerq.com where you can get more information, show notes, and related articles to today's topic. Also, if you like what you're hearing, head on over to iTunes, subscribe to the podcast, and make sure you leave us a rating and a review. We'd love to hear your feedback. Thanks again.
The Career Q podcast is produced by Lens Group Media and recorded at Jack Straw Cultural Center in the lovely Seattle, Washington.
That makes me cuckoo.